Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Ashto Tarasata Shri Shri Madhi, His Divine Grace of High Chanana Ravinda Bhakti Shri Prabhupada Ki, ISKCON, BBT Founder Charya, save the whole world Shri Prabhupada Ki, Jai Nitya Vishnu Vishnu Pada Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Charya Ashto Tarasata Shri Shri Madhi, His Divine Grace of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Ki, Ananta Koti Vaishnavinda Ki, Nama Charya Sarai Dastakur Ki. Prem se kho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sita Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Govardhana Shama Kund Radha Kund Giri Govardhana Ki Braj Bhumi Shivindama Dama Ki Navadip Mayapur Dama Ki Purusham Chetra Jagannath Puri Dama Ki Ganga Mai Ki Jamuna Mai Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Tulasi Maharani Ki Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Nitai Go Premanandi. Oh, glorious assembled bodies. Oh, glorious assembled bodies. Oh, glorious assembled bodies. Oh, glorious. Lord, if it is Sri Guru and Sri Garanga, oh, glorious to Prabhupada Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Pura Grama Vrajodhyana. Pura Grama Vrajodhyana. Pura Grama Vrajodhyana. Chetra Rashrama Makaran. Chetra Shrama Makaran. Puro Grama Vrajodhyana. Chetra Shrama Maka. Chetra hang on. Chetra Arama, not Ashrama, sorry. Chetra Arama Akaran. It's actually 4 words put together, so it's a bit complicated. Keta Karvata Goshangs Cha Keta Karvata Goshangs Cha Keta Karvata Goshangs Cha Dadahu Patanani Cha Dadahu Patanani Cha Dadahu Patanani Cha Keta Karvata Goshangs Cha Dadahu Patanani Cha Pura Grama Vrajodhyana Chetra Ramashramakaran Keta Karvata Goshangs Cha Dadahu Patanani Cha Pura Grama Vrajodhyana Chetra Ramashramakaran Keta Karvata Goshangs Cha Dadahu Patanani Cha Vrajojana Jadahu Patananija. Vaishnavis. Yetarama Shvamakaran Yetakaravata Goshangsha Dadahu Patananicha Yetakaravata Goshangsha Dadahu Patananicha. Pura, cities and towns. It's like sometimes you hear the word Jagannath Puri, or same thing, Puri, place where people live. Grama, villages. Vraja, pasturing grounds. Udyana, gardens. Chetra, agricultural fields. Arama, natural forests. Ashrama, hermitages of saintly persons. Akaran, and mines, and in parenthesis, that produce valuable metals to maintain Brahminical culture, such as gold, silver, things like that. Keta, farm. There's a word there. Farm villages. Karvata, mountain villages. Goshan, the villages of cowherds. Cha, and Dadahu, they burned. Patanani, the capitals. Cha, also. So here there's a list of places. There's cities, villages, pasturing grounds, cow pens, gardens, agricultural fields, and natural forests. Hermitages, mines, the residential quarter of the farmers, the mountain villages, the villages of cow protectors, the cowherd men, and they also burnt the government capitals. So what's the common thing with all of these? Can you think of something that's common with them, especially from the perspective of Krishna consciousness? Civilization of Varnashram. And what's the purpose of Varnashram? That's part of it, but what's the real purpose of it? Yeah, it's all meant. All these things are meant for pleasing Krishna, as it says. You'll see it here in the purport. It says Samsiddhi Haritoshanam. That all these things are meant for satisfying Vishnu. That's the purpose of them, and so that's why they're attacking those things, because they know they're not stupid people. They're very intelligent. They know these things are meant for satisfying God. So we want to upset Him. So let's attack those things that are meant for His pleasure. It's very what's the word? Vengeful, and they're really they're out to get Vishnu. Whatever they can do, because Vishnu's killed their Hiranyakashipu's brother, and so that whatever they can do to upset him, that's what they want to do. Whatever they can do to stamp him out and exterminate him, and kill all those people who are supporting him. So that they're trying to undermine Brahminical culture. They're trying to undermine cow protection. They're trying to undermine the whole social fabric, because the social fabric, especially in this time, is set up for the purpose of pleasing Vishnu. It's all focused on serving Vishnu. And so that's their endeavor, is to just stomp this out. what did Bhaktivinoda Thakur? There was one time there was a village, because Bhaktivinoda Thakur he owned some villages, and one time there was a saintly person visited the village, and he wasn't received at all. Not even wasn't received properly. He wasn't received at all, and this came to Bhaktivinoda Thakur's attention, and then he said that I can't remember the exact phrase. You know this story, Melly? He said he would exterminate the village or something with great. I can't remember the word he used, but it was really kind of heavy statement. You know, like with he really focus on stamping them out. It was a really heavy statement he made. So same idea here is the demons. They've got this determination to stamp out everything that is favorable to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada's translation: the demons set fire to the cities, villages, pasturing grounds, cow pens, gardens, agricultural fields, and natural forests. They burned the hermitages of the saintly persons, the important mines that produce valuable metals, the residential quarters of the agriculturalists, the mountain villages, and the villages of the cow protectors, the cowherd men. They also burned the government capitals. Responsively, please. The demons set fire to the cities, villages, pasturing grounds, cow pens, gardens, agricultural fields, and natural forests. They burned the hermitages of the saintly persons, the important mines that produced valuable metals, the residential quarters of the agriculturalists, the mountain villages, and the villages of the cow protectors, cowherd men. They also burned the government capitals. So you can see how they're trying to, with great discrimination, they're really focusing on these things that are meant for the service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prabhupada's purport: the word Udyayana refers to places where trees are especially grown to produce fruits and flowers, which are most important for human civilization. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 9:26, Patram pushpam param toyam yome bhaktya prayachati tadaham bhakti paharitim asnami prayatakmana. If one offers me with love and devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, I will accept it. This is quite an interesting verse also, in that we see that Krishna, twice in this verse, he mentions bhakti. It's not just we go through the motions of offering or whatever. We don't. It's not just an external mechanical thing. Our approach to the Lord must be imbued with bhakti. So this often, and when we teach devotees how to offer bhoga, I always ask this question: what causes Krishna to accept? And like devotees will say different things, tulsi, following the rituals, this thing, that thing. But ultimately, the point of bhakti comes out. They say, Krishna says in the Gita, if one offers with love and devotion, I will accept. So then naturally the question comes, who has bhakti? So who here has bhakti? A devotee. So are you a devotee? If you had what? That sounds a little bit circular. Like, who's the president of the United States? Oh, that person who sits in the White House. Who's the person who sits in the White House? The president of the United States. A little bit circular. But who has bhakti? So then maybe he should do the offering. Huh? Who has bhakti? I would say that anyone who's following the rules of devotional service has bhakti. And actually, because we're following this process of devotional service under the guidance of the authorities, under the guidance of the spiritual master, under the guidance of scriptures, we have bhakti. It may not be, as we see, I've just been reading the last few chapters of the Antya-lila, it may not be the kind of bhakti that's manifested by Lord Chaitanya, where he's, rolling on the ground, he's manifesting horripilations on his body, his limbs are becoming distended, he's just going completely unconscious to external, that's not that kind of bhakti. But it's the bhakti where we follow the rules and regulations of devotional service, and this is called Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Because Vaidhi Sadhana means following rules and regulations of devotional service is what it means. And this is defined as being bhakti. And because the purpose, you have to look at the purpose, is anukulyena krishnanu. The purpose of following these rules and regulations is not just so we're very good followers of rules and regulations. That's got nothing to do with it. What's the purpose? The purpose of following these rules and regulations is for the satisfaction of Vishnu or Krishna. Therefore, it's bhakti. It may not be the most elevated bhakti, but because we have this, and there's that verse that I just quoted that line from in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which how does that verse start with? The first line? Yeah, Anya Abhilasha Shunyan Jnana Kamarya Anavritan Anukulyena Krishnanu Shiranam Bhakti Ruttama. So it's describing the process of bhakti or devotional service as being that which is Anya Abhilashita. Abhilash means desire. It means to have no other desire. Shunya. Shunya means like a sunyavadi, means zero. The desires are zero. You have no other desire than there's no jnana, there's no karma. And we serve Krishna, like Krishna Anushilana. Anushilana means you're doing something for that, so the idea is you're doing something for Krishna. So, and Anukulyena Krishnana. Anukulyena means favorable. Just like we see, there's different examples. Like you can see Mother Yasoda, she was chastising Krishna. So you think, well, how's that devotional service? She's raising a stick to chastise Krishna. She wants to chastise God. How's that devotional service? But her intention was she was doing this so that Krishna would grow up to be a nice young man, so that he understood proper values, he understood proper conduct. There's an interesting story in the I think it's the Chaitanya Bhagavat, where Lord Chaitanya was playing with a dog. Yeah? That's in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, right, Bill? And Sachimata was horrified when she saw him playing with a dog. And she says, you come from a Brahman caste. How can you play with this unclean animal? What are people going to think? They see a Brahmana who's playing with a dog. They're just going to think it's very, very degraded. And you'll bring disrepute or ill repute to the Brahman caste by doing this. So she was, really clearly explaining the Brahminical culture. But the point is like the intention of Yasoda Mai and also Sachimata, it was a favorable intention, because it wasn't just their intention wasn't simply to punish. Their intention was to set them on the right path. And then we can see in the example of Kamsa, for instance, when he found out that Vishnu was going to kill him, he was constantly absorbed in thought of Vishnu. The same as here, we see Hiranyakashipu is constantly absorbed in thought of Vishnu. So is that, and that's like, our goal. Krishna says in the Gita, always think of me, become my devotee, worship me and offer your homage to me, thus you'll come to me without fail. So what's the difference between Kamsa or Hiranyakashipu always thinking of Krishna and us always thinking of Krishna? What's the difference? Must be some difference, yeah? Or is it the same thing? Yeah, so the thing is that Kamsa, and Hiranyakashipu, their contemplation of Vishnu is they wanted to kill Vishnu. So their constant thought in Vishnu was not favorable, whereas our constantly being absorbed in thoughts of Krishna is that we want to serve Krishna, we want to please Krishna. So even though the external activity may seem the same, because the intention is different, therefore the result is different. And this is a very important element in the process of bhakti, is the intention of the person who's doing the activity. Fruits and flowers, and this is a really interesting point. Fruits and flowers are very much pleasing to the Lord, If one wants to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he can simply offer fruits and flowers, and the Lord will be pleased to accept them. Our only duty is to please the Supreme Godhead. Samsiddhi Haritoshanam. So there's a nice verse in I think it's the second chapter of the first canto, where I think it's Sukadeva Goswami, maybe Sutta Goswami, I can't remember, is explaining that the whole purpose of the Varnashram system, because we see, in India, it's still there's some elements of Varnashram quite prominent in India, especially you go to Vrindavan, so you'll see there's so many castes and classes in Vrindavan. But their focus on the castes and classes is more about, well, I'm a Brahmana, so I'm better than you. You're a Sudra, or you're a Militra, or you're a Chandra, or they discriminate in terms of people's caste or class in order to dominate, in order to it's kind of like a thing that's motivated by false ego. But the point that's being made in the Bhagavatam is that the whole idea of Varnashram is to please Krishna. It means, like, according to your nature, you serve Krishna. It's like if one has a nature of being a worker, someone who likes to work in the fields and things like that, it's not like you're lesser or better than anyone else, because ultimately we're all servants of Krishna. But the point is you have a particular nature, so use that nature for the service of Krishna. Use that nature for the satisfaction of the Lord. Whatever your nature is, it doesn't really matter. Like, you're a teacher, so use that for teaching Krishna. Murli's a Brahmana, so he uses that for satisfying Krishna. Whatever it is you're doing, you use it for satisfying Krishna. And then that's the perfection of the activity. But if you're using that activity for the gratification of your senses, then that activity will bring bondage in this material world. It will cause you to become bound up to that, or attached to that position that, I'm a teacher, or I'm a Brahman, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. But that's not the point. The point of any activity in this material world, if one is seriously interested in leaving this material world and going back to Godhead, then the focus of that activity must be to please Krishna, because that's the purpose of the human form of life. Our existence is simply to serve Krishna. It's just like you have fingers on your hand. What's the purpose of the fingers? It's to serve the body. If they do something different, then they're useless. The only purpose of the fingers is to serve the body. Is they take food, they put it in the mouth, they put do your buttons up on your clothes, they do up your your ties on whatever. So the purpose of the fingers is to serve the function of the body. And in the same way, it's described how the living entity is part and parcel of the complete whole. The jiva, us, are part and parcel of the complete whole. So the purpose of the part and parcel is to serve the whole. If we understand who we are, then we understand what our function is. And as Lord Chaitanya describes, he says, Jivera Sutbhoy, Krishnera Nityadas, Krishnera Tasta Shakti, Veda Prakash. That the nature of the jiva is this Tatasta Shakti. So Krishna has three types of energies. He has the Baharanga Shakti, the Tatasta Shakti, and the internal. So there's the external energy, Baharanga, there's the marginal potency, and there's the internal. So we are just Baharanga, so Tatasta means that's our situation. But because we're in this position of Tatasta, it's a little bit like, that if you go down the beach, I don't know if anyone's been to the beach, the beach is a distance away from here, but the section between the low tide and the high tide mark, that's what's called Tatasta. So sometimes it's uncovered, sometimes it's covered by water. So that's our situation also. Sometimes we're covered by the modes of material nature, sometimes we're uncovered. The uncovered state means we're Krishna conscious. The covered state means we're absorbed in the material nature. And that's the situation of living entities. So we can go either way. But when we come into contact with Krishna consciousness, when we come into contact with the process of bhakti, then the living entity's natural condition becomes revealed. This condition of being an eternal servant of God becomes revealed. And that's the process of devotional service, is to help us to reveal that natural position. Whatever we do and whatever our occupation, our main purpose should be to please the Supreme Lord. All the paraphernalia mentioned in this verse is especially meant for the satisfaction of the Lord, not the satisfaction of one's senses. And this is the problem in this material world. Like everything you see here, there's nothing wrong with what you see in the material world. You know, all these different inventions the scientists are coming up with, all these things engineers are making, like cars and planes. All these things are great if they're connected with Krishna. But as soon as they're not connected with Krishna, they become asara, they become useless. Prabhupada would sometimes say that all these things in this material world, they're just big zeros. Your skyscraper buildings, your jumbo jets, whatever it is you have. So many things in this material world, they're just big zeros. They're useless unless you connect them with Krishna. And it's just like if you take a long string of zeros, what do they add up? You can have 1 million zeros in a row. What do they add up to? What if you have 5 million zeros? What do they add up to? It doesn't matter how many zeros you have. They mean nothing. They add up to 0. But if you put 1 in front of all those zeros, what do you have? You have a very big number. So the 1 we put in front of all those zeros is not me. I'm not the 1. I'm a 0. But if I can become connected with Krishna, then it becomes substantial. So the idea is to take all these things in the material world and connect them to Krishna. Then they have meaning. Then they have purpose. It's the same with our existence. If we connect ourselves with Krishna, then our existence has a purpose. But if it's not connected with Krishna, or if all these things we have in this material world, if they're not connected with Krishna, they have no purpose. They have no meaning. They're just an obstacle in our onward journey in this material world. So the whole purpose of life is how to connect everything we have with Krishna. Well, this needs to be the purpose of life. And this is explained in both in the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam, that the purpose of life is to satisfy Vishnu. Its only purpose is to satisfy the Lord. And then, when we're following this path, when we're following this purpose of life, then we become peaceful, we become happy, we become rightfully situated. But if we don't follow this, if we're doing something different, or if we're trying to be the center of attention, if we're trying to be the controller and the enjoyer in this material world, then we experience anxiety, then we experience stress. And there's ample opportunity in this material world for anxiety and stress, isn't it? There's no shortage of it in this material world. Just like just look at what's happening in the world right now. There's wars going on. There's forest fires. I mean, forest fires like countries have never experienced before. In Canada, in Spain, and probably we'll find in Australia in February there'll be a massive fire season again, like we've never experienced before. Every year in Australia, the fire's just getting worse and worse and worse, like they've never experienced. I remember it was 2020 when the pandemic struck, and actually no, it's before the pandemic struck. It was just before that. I was returning to Australia, and I've flown over bushfires before, and they're just fires. These fires were incredible. I mean, we flew over them in the plane, and you could actually see the flames. They were just like leaping. And we're at 20,000 feet, you can see the flames leaping out of the trees, just gigantic. You can even see them from the satellites in space. They took satellite photos of these fires to the west of Sydney. Incredible. And that's just the nature of what's happening in this world. So there's no end of cause for anxiety. But if you take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then Gyatva Mam Shantim Richiti. You'll know peace, because you understand why everything's happening in this material world. So the last section. The government, indeed the entire society, should be structured in such a way that everyone can be trained to satisfy the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But unfortunately, especially in this age. Na te vidu swatikatim Vishnu. Very, very nice verse from the Bhagavatam. It says, Na te vidu swatikatim. So na te vidu means they do. Te means they. Na means no. Na te vidu. They do not know. Swatikatim. What is the supreme destiny? Gati or gatim means destination. Sva ata. So swa means own, ata means benefit. Yeah? So what is the supreme, what's the most beneficial destination? The supreme most, swatikatim. He Vishnum. Indeed it is Vishnu. Yeah? Durashaya ye bahirata manana. Andaya tanda upani namanas. Te pisha tantram urudamni badha. Urudamni badha. Bound up. Very urudamni means very strong. Very strong ropes. They're bound up by these very strong ropes in this material world. Why? Because they're trying to enjoy their senses. You know, the living entity in this world thinks they're liberated, thinks that there's a nice verse in the 10th canto where it talks about this, vimukta manina, how they're thinking, because of their so-called religious practices, that actually they're liberated. They're thinking they're very, very elevated. They're thinking they're very advanced. But avishuddha buddhaya, because their intelligence is impure, because their intelligence is contaminated by the modes of material nature, they're thinking erroneously that they're liberated, they're advanced in spiritual path. But actually, one whose endeavor is to pursue sense gratification is just bewildered about the goal of life. If you listen to the advertisements that go on this day and age, they'll tell you the goal of life is to have, an Arnold Clark car. I was asking a doctor about this yesterday, because they're seeing everywhere. I'm seeing this sticker, Arnold Clark. I said, what's that about? They saw they're a car yard, and people buy cars from them. And you see them all over the place, So they might be thinking that's the goal of life. In order to have a nice house in Glasgow, a 2-story house in Glasgow, they might be thinking that's the goal of life. But these things are temporary. They come and go. Everything in this material world is temporary. It has a beginning, it has an end. But the process of bhakti is eternal. The relationship with the living entity, with the Supreme Personality of God, is eternal. So why put all our energy into trying to expand temporary things, trying to maintain or hold on to temporary things? You can't. Just like I had an experience last night. I have this woolen zip-up jacket, and I came in about 9:30. I think we got back last night, and I was walking down the passageway in the dark, and then I put the key into the door, and somehow or other there's 2 keys, and one key's got a sharp end, and it stuck itself into my jacket and made a hole. And I was, oh God, I've made a hole in my jacket, But then I started to think, well, but it's a temporary thing. Why get attached to these temporary things? That they come and they go. But the self is eternal. The body's not eternal. The body's temporary. And anyone who's past 50 or 60 years old really starts to get a sense of how temporary the body is, because it's falling apart right before your very eyes. Like now, this is just fuzzy lines to me. 20 years ago, the book could have been sitting on Prabhupada's Vyasasana. I could have read it from here, because I had very good eyes, but now the eyes are falling apart. My hearing's like, a doctor was talking to me last night, and every second thing he said, I said, what was that? What was that? My hearing's going. And it's like, so it's just, you can really get this perception as you get older of how the body is so temporary. But when you're in your 20s and your teens and stuff like that, you're kind of like, yeah, I'm going to live forever. I'm indestructible. And I remember the first time I started to drive a car, I drove the car like I thought I was indestructible. But after a few, I came unstuck a few times, I started to realize, this is dangerous. I have to be careful here. I remember one time I was driving down this mountain road, like, it was all like, it's dirt road. It was all like all these corners and stuff like that. And at one point I lost it, and the car went zooming around the corner sideways, and then started to shoot over this cliff. It was like you see in the movies, like the car was there with its wheels hanging over the cliff. And that really sort of dawned on me, like, I could die doing this, so I sort of backed off on the accelerator a bit after that. But, it's like we have this perception, because the self is eternal. We have this perception of eternality, but we don't make the connection that the body's not eternal, especially when we're younger. We tend to be a little bit clouded by, our false ego, and thinking that, I can live forever. I'm indestructible. But when you get into your 30s and stuff, this idea of when you've had a few accidents, you've had a few injuries and stuff, this idea of indestructibility starts to diminish. And it's kind of interesting, because in movies, I'm sure it's always been like that in movies, but people, they watch movies and stuff like that, and the hero, we used to watch this thing when I was a kid, 10, 11, 12, growing up. There was an American war kind of series called Combat, and there was this guy. He was a sergeant. He led the platoon, and like every show, he would get shot up or maimed, disfigured, whatever like that, and the next one he comes back good as new. So they're trying to promote this kind of idea of the living entity being indestructible, or the body being indestructible. Because then you'll just push on with life and you'll just try to enjoy yourself as much as you can, because I'm going to live forever. But they don't see the disconnect between the nature of the self and the nature of the body, because the body is temporary, it is short-lived, it is prone to failure. The soul is eternal. For the soul, there's neither birth nor death at any time. Has not come into being, does not come into being, will not come into being. Unborn, ever existing, primeval. Not slain when the body is slain. There's such a difference between the body and the self. But in the modern society, there's no education for that. They don't see how the body is different from the self. But spiritual life, the spiritual knowledge, tells us, shows us very plainly. There's many stories, and even at the end of this chapter, you'll see that Hiranyakashipu, the greatest of demons, he's showing how the body is different from the self. He talked about this story about, I think, Suyagya, or Sujana or something. He's showing how, you shouldn't lament over the loss of the body, because it's temporary. The body is destined to perish. But the self is eternal. And this is the very fundamental understanding of the Bhagavad Gita. Jayate mriyate vakadachin nayam bhutva bhavita bhavana joni joshashuta. There's neither birth nor death for the body, for the self. It's the body that forms. It's the body that dies. So the whole first section of the second chapter of Gita is focusing on this point of the eternality of the self and the temporality of the body. It's very important to understand. This is the point being made here, is that whatever we have, whatever facility we have in this material world, should be used for the satisfaction of Krishna. In all our actions, in all our thoughts, in all our words, in all our deeds, we should use these things for the satisfaction of Krishna. And it's easy to do that when things are going, when the sailing is smooth. But when things become a little bit difficult, that's when it becomes challenging. But there's an interesting prayer in the 8th chapter of the Bhagavatam, first canto. Kunti Devi, she prays to Krishna. It's saying, because the Pandavas went through so many different calamities. They were in the house of black, and they were set on fire. Karuna tried to destroy them, and then Bhima, they tried to poison the poison cake, and he was saved from that. So many, the gambling match where they tried to strip the woman naked. So many different calamities they faced. And every calamity that happened to them, what did they do? They, tried to defend themselves, they ran away. What did they do every time there's calamity? Huh? They took shelter of Krishna. It's the point that Kunti makes. She says, something. Let the calamities, let them come again and again and again. I don't mind. Why? Because when the calamities come, that's the nature of a devotee. As soon as a calamity comes, the devotee thinks of Krishna. What would Krishna want me to do in this circumstance? What is the thing that's most pleasing to Krishna in this circumstance? So you see with the Pandavas on the battle of Kurukshetra, they're always contemplating what would Krishna want, or not just on the Kurukshetra, but any situation. They're always thinking, what would Krishna want? How can I please Krishna? Favorable or unfavorable? So she's thinking that whenever there's a calamity, then I think of you. And when I think of you, Karuna Bhavan dāsa. I no longer have to fear death. So this is, when we're always absorbed in thinking of Krishna, we don't have to fear anything, not just rebirth and death. We don't have to fear anything that's material, because we know that this constant remembrance of Krishna, I'm always perfectly situated. There's a nice verse from Lord Shiva, where he's explaining to Parvati the story, I think it's in the 6th canto, where Chitraketu was laughing at the situation of Parvati. She was laughing at what Shiva was making, and all these sages asking Lord Shiva questions. So he thought that was a very interesting scene. So he laughed, and Parvati got really upset. And then he came down and got off his chariot. Person. And so she told us Nṛsiṁha Kavaca. So they don't really experience, just like we see Prahlad Maharaj, and we'll see in this chapter here, how Prahlad Maharaj is tormented by his father in so many horrible ways. Bitten to death by snakes, thrown off a cliff, and in every circumstance, he just constantly remained absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. He was chanting the name of Krishna. So he never saw it as being a favorable or unfavorable circumstance, because he was always absorbed in thought of Krishna. And for one who takes shelter of Krishna in such a fashion, then they're actually Jivan Mukta Suchite, it mentions in one of the Puranas, that they're actually understood to be liberated. Why? Because they're always absorbed in thought of Krishna. They're considered not to be situated in this material world because of this constant thought in Krishna. So the point I'm trying to get to here is that whatever situation we find ourselves in life, whether it's a favorable situation or it's an unfavorable situation, whether people are being nice to us or people are being unkind to us, whether we're getting the results we want or we're not getting the results we want, always act in a way that's pleasing to Krishna. And sometimes it's very easy. You understand, when you attend the program in the morning, you say, oh, Krishna wants me to chant Hare Krishna. If I chant his holy name, it's pleasing to him. If I serve the devotees, that's pleasing to Krishna. If I distribute books, that's pleasing to Krishna, pleasing to Prabhupada. But when things are difficult, that's when it can become more challenging. And what tends to happen, it's just like, when things are going good, it's easy to act like a saintly person. Yeah? But when you're under pressure, that's when the test really comes. You put anything under pressure, and you start to see. It's just like, when you're getting your car fixed, for instance, they do these stress tests on the car. Like, they'll put a new radiator in or a new hose or something like that, and they put this thing on the top of the radiator, and they pump up the pressure to see if it's going to leak. Yeah? And if there's a flaw there, it'll come out. Yeah? So it's the same for us. It's like when we're put under pressure, that's when you really start to see your nature. That's when you really start to see what your trigger points are. That's when you really start to see the areas you need to work on. Yeah? So that's when it's really important that we start to take shelter of Krishna, is when we're under pressure. We take shelter of Krishna in these circumstances and try to act in a way that's pleasing to Krishna, because you'll start to see, and the fact of this material world is that these times of stress and pressure are going to constantly be happening. As Kali Yuga progresses, it's going to become more and more common for us. So the idea is by studying the scriptures, by associating with devotees, by applying ourselves to the devotional process, then we eradicate these anarthas. We destroy all these different anarthas that are in the heart. This is the point of what is called anartha nivriti. Nivriti means to destroy. So the process of bhakti is called anartha nivriti. As soon as you start chanting Hare Krishna, as soon as you start following regular principles, as soon as you start doing any of these activities, you're engaged in anartha nivriti. As soon as you take the process of bhakti, this is removing anarthas from the heart. So when we come into these times of stress, when there's, especially we see when there's conflict amongst devotees, then often you'll see bad qualities come out. They start to think badly of each other. They start to call each other names, things like that. But this is not pleasing to Krishna, and this is not how we get Krishna's favor. We need to, whenever we get into these difficult circumstances, immediately start to think, what would be pleasing to Krishna? How can I act in this situation? And even if it's, Krishna's a little bit too abstract, a little bit too far away, think, what would be pleasing to Prabhupada? What would be pleasing to my spiritual master in this situation? Or whoever is your spiritual inspiration, the person who inspires you in Krishna consciousness. What would be pleasing to them? And in this way, we'll become more and more capable, more and more adept at acting in a way that is pleasing to Krishna in all circumstances. Okay, any questions, comments on this wonderful verse and purport? Not quite here, but maybe a little bit louder.
What do you do in that situation? You just encourage the person to stay home.
Yeah.
Maybe exceptional, and you say, well, I'll be coming very soon.
Yeah, I don't think the process of initiation really has much to do with it. It's just as you apply yourself more and more effectively to the process of bhakti, initiated or not, then the anarthas start to become apparent. You start to see the anarthas because the process of bhakti is purifying. And, in the beginning stages, it seems, from my observation over the years, in the beginning stages, there seems to be like a period of grace, where you're able to apply yourself to the process of bhakti. And it all seems it's like anything new is attractive, anything new. It's just like, about a month ago, I got a new computer. And they're fantastic when they're new, but give it a few months and I'll just think it's like any other computer, because it's no longer new. So the senses are always attracted to new things, it's a new experience and it always seems wonderful. But then after some time, then, the true nature of things becomes apparent. So then after some time at practicing the process of bhakti, we start to experience the effect of the purification. And it's just like sometimes the analogy is given like when you make ghee, when you first melt the butter, it all looks like a nice, yellow liquid, but then as you're slowly heating it, then the ghee solids start to rise to the top. These are the impurities coming out. And, it can take a period of a few hours for all the ghee solids to come out. And then when you finish, when all the ghee solids are removed, then you have pure ghee. So it's the same in the process of bhakti. In the beginning stages, it all just seems like it's all hunky-dory, things are going great, I'm not having a problem with my chanting. But then after some time, when you become a little bit more adept at chanting, when you become a little bit more connected with the process of purification, or not just connected, but sort of just more apply yourself to it more, then you start to see how the anarthas are coming up, and it starts to think, oh gosh, I never realized I had so many problems, I was better off before. And often you hear this, they'll say, I was better off before, because I was happy before. But but before we were in ignorance, we didn't realize how many anarthas are there, because we're covered by the illusion of Maya. But as you start to practice the process of bhakti, as you start to purify, and the coverings of Maya start to part a little bit, then you start to see the reality. So it's just the effect of the process of bhakti. Is what? Docility. Yeah. Yeah. But you'll see, like saintly persons are those who seriously apply themselves to the process of bhakti, and which means the purification process. That's a saintly person. They may not be perfect, and often you'll see that saintly persons seem to have different anarthas, but they're seriously applying themselves to the process of bhakti. They've taken this process as their life and soul, and that's what we need to do: is to take this process in our life and soul, take this goal of pleasing Krishna as my only business in life, whatever I do. And there's I was quoting that verse last night. Yad karoshi yadisnasi yajrahosi yad yat tapasyashi kunteya tat kurusha marapara. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, give away, whatever austerities you perform, you do that as an offering to me. This is how you please Krishna. Is everything you do. When you interact with another Vaishnava, do that as an offering to Krishna. When you interact with a non-Vaishnava, do that as an offering to Krishna. When you're going to, we explained this to Baleshwar last night, when you go to work, when you're working in your job, because what I see happens is, especially for the devotees who are, raising families and they have a job, they see the two things as separate. That's where the problem is if you see it as being separate from Krishna consciousness. So it means what Krishna says, whatever you do, yad karoshi, whatever you do that as an offering to me. So you're raising a family, do that as an offering to Krishna. It's just like you have to discipline the child. Discipline the child as an offering to Krishna. What is the best way to discipline this child so they can be inspired to become devotees of Krishna? Beat the living daylights out of them until they're black and blue? That's what many people do. No, like Prabhupada's father, he would come to him and say, I don't like to do this. You are my son, but it is my duty as your father to discipline you. He had a Krishna conscious approach to it. His whole idea, Mother Yasoda, she's disciplining Krishna so he can grow up to be a nice person. Sachimati, she's disciplining Lord Chaitanya so he can be a nice devotee of Krishna. So whatever we do, we can't, if we're seeing the separation between it, means we're not understanding the process of bhakti. We have to see that whatever we do, this is an offering to Krishna. So, even, when you have to, as a manager or as a leader, you have to discipline those around you, do that as an offering to Krishna. When you have to, interact with non-devotees, like sometimes, the various authorities in the municipality or something may be causing trouble for us. We don't go into battle with them. We go there and interact with them as an offering to Krishna. Okay, what's the most Krishna conscious way I can do this? How can I please Krishna with this activity? It's easy to do it when we're all sitting around having prasadam and there's a nice feast or whatever, and we're serving devotees, and we're receiving prasad. That's easy. We're in a kirtan, you've got a nice kirtan leader, it's a fantastic kirtan, I'm feeling very inspired. That's easy to act in a way that's pleasing Krishna. But when the tension, when the conflict comes, how do we act in a way that's pleasing to Krishna? That's the real test of the devotee's mettle. Is how we act in all circumstances to please Krishna. Because everything we do needs to become an offering to Krishna. That's Krishna consciousness. Anything else? Yes, Prabhu. Yeah. If we look at the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, especially you can look at, say, the prayers of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, for instance. He says, Kintu Prabhu ya priya eva tasya. So the Guru, he's very priya, he's very dear to Krishna. So we may not be so dear to Krishna. To some extent we are. But the spiritual master is very dear to Krishna. Why? Because he's given his life. Prabhupada explains, because he's given his life to canvas on Krishna's behalf. So that person's dear. So the system we follow in ISKCON, in Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, is we offer to our Guru, who then offers it to his Guru, who then offers it to his Guru, who then offers it to his Guru, etc., etc., etc. So it gets back to Lord Chaitanya. It's offered to Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya offers it to Radharani. Radharani offers it to Krishna. If Radharani offers it to Krishna, you think Krishna will say no? So if you follow the parampara, because we come in the parampara, our only connection with Krishna is through the parampara. So the notion of trying to offer to Krishna directly, it's just not. It's not sound. It's not a sound concept. We come in the parampara. Our very kind of the fact that we're able to exist in Krishna consciousness is due to the members of the parampara. The fact that we've come into contact with Krishna consciousness is simply through Srila Prabhupada and his followers. So therefore, when we're doing any service to the deities, we do it through the agency of the parampara, and in this way, Krishna will accept, because it's going through the Guru parampara to Lord Chaitanya, to Radharani, then to Krishna. So if Radharani offers him something, he can't refuse. He can't. And Prabhupada mentions that if you follow this system, Krishna must accept. He has no choice. He must accept, because he's controlled by his devotees. Prabhupada explained to Janani Vasubhu one time in Mayapur, is they were getting deities of Radha Krishna. They had deities of Radha Krishna. And Radharani in Mayapur, she holds in her hand, her right hand, she holds a tambula, this palm, a leaf like that. And Prabhupada explained to Janani Vasubhu that when Radharani is like this, when she's offering something to Krishna, Krishna can never leave, because he's bound up by her love. And this verse here that Prabhupada's quoting, Patram Pushpa, when one offers with love, with real love, not just the make-believe stuff we talk about in this material world, but when it's genuine love for Krishna, then Krishna, he must accept. He can't not accept it. He can't, because he's controlled by the devotee's love. So when we go through the parampara, this is following the system that's been established by our acharyas. So this is a manifest, because we don't have pure love right now, we follow the system, we follow the rules and regulations, this Vaidhi sadhana, then Krishna accepts, because that's a manifestation of our love. Love has different manifestations as we evolve in the process of bhakti. In the beginning stages, the love is manifested by following the rules and regulations given by spiritual authorities. But then as we mature in devotional service, that love takes on different manifestations until it gets to the point of being prem, when it's just like you're just completely overwhelmed by love for Krishna, and Krishna's overwhelmed by your love also. He can't control himself. He can't, he's just completely controlled by the devotee at that stage. So, yeah. Anything else? Okay, thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhakti ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Hare Krishna, Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.